G'day legends, I hope that you're really well. Now today, firstly, we're going to talk about the strike against Moscow, of course, then a look at the maps, and then we're going to talk about Wagner PMC in Belarus, as I had a coffee with a good friend yesterday who works in the private industry, and he has been in the same area of operations that Wagner has been working as well, and has some interesting ideas about the mutiny, what's happening in Belarus, and maybe some future stuff from that, as well as some experiences. So that will be then after the maps. Now, a drone has struck a high-rise building in the centre of Moscow in the CBD, the Central Business District, and Russia has then closed the airspace just for a short while over Moscow. Now, Russia says that it downed 3 drones, but one has got through. Now, Ukraine, as always, has denied any involvement in these drone attacks. So let's have a look at what we are looking at here. So this is where the building is, and you can see that this floor here on the corner has had some substantial damage to there. Now, we also have a video or a photograph inside, a video of where this was hit on the floor. So we can see here, business as computers, desks, chairs, things like this. We don't know what exactly was here. As we know, these high-rise buildings, as buildings anywhere, have multiple different businesses or industries throughout them here, but substantial amount of damage. Now, this happened, I believe, at about 4:30 a.m. Now, something I do want to say is you can see that this was a very directed attack. It looks like it was targeting this specific area. Now, we can't say that is 100%, but it does look like it was very aimed onto there. And video footage has come out as well, and then you can hear the drones. Now, many have said you can hear multiple things, and I think what you're hearing there is actually the drone, like a quadrotor going through a built-up area. You get a lot of rebound of sound, and it's incredibly difficult to tell where they are. A drone, if you've ever had a drone or just, you DJI other things, it's very difficult to listen and go, it's there, that's hard. And in a built-up environment with that echoing, bouncing, even gets more and more and more difficult. So you can hear it here. Unsure where it is, and then the strike on the building there, and a very large explosion from there, and then people, of course, in a bit of a panic from there. Now, we know Moscow has a lot of air defense and electronic warfare, not only surrounding it, but also within the center. Moscow is a very big city, and the chances of getting a drone from Ukraine all the way to Moscow are very slim. And we have seen attacks before, like the firebombing attacks against the Kremlin leading up to then the Victory Day parades. And we brought up the idea of not only the electronic warfare, but also where there's radio wave blackout spots. And then in the weeks or so following, I was sent off a robotics drone expert working in the military and industries that he did a full overview to me of how this actually could be done, including waypoints and a list of equipment off, say, like Alibaba and some like basic drone shops to actually build a drone that could navigate electronic warfare, jamming and radio blackout areas through like a shielded autopilot system. And these things were tens of dollars. And this would either be by a kamikaze or a drone to drop munitions and recover the drone. I got 2 layouts of how that would happen. But it did explicitly say that from Ukrainian territory is unlikely just due to the distance, but from partisans it was very doable, that it would be from this area, would hit this waypoint, turn off onto autopilot, shielded, then blah, blah, blah. And in his professional opinion, was very doable with off-the-shelf equipment. That said, I don't think I can share any of that here, as you can't even show like strip and assembly of weapons, but we know drones have been such a big influence in this war. I wonder how this will go forward in just civilian drones being owned by people like me. Like I own a little DJI, and I'm wondering how that will go forward and how the restrictions will be. As we know, the surveillance, the weaponization has been so effective, and there's no really good way against them that the military has come up with yet. But my 2 cents on this is it does look like an incredibly specifically targeted attack on this floor, on this corner. And Russia has reported there's no casualties, but we don't know. The Moscow mayor, Sergei Sobyan, has said Ukrainian drones attacked tonight. Facades of 2 city office towers were slightly damaged. There are no victims or injured. I think the real benefit of these attacks in Moscow isn't hitting this floor, depending on if someone important was there or whatever, but it's more the mental effect on the population. life for the people living in Moscow has not really changed, other than maybe some different drink brands on the shelf, or Macca's has rebranded. But there are more companies have stayed and are trading under different brands than people would like to believe. There's some very interesting like vlogs on YouTube about YouTube, like everyday life in Russia, like 2022, 23 say that, and they'll walk around like shopping centres, and it will be like, oh, this was a jean shop under the brand X, and now it's changed to this, but all the product is still the same. Things like that. That this war is not really at home for many Russians, particularly those living in like Moscow, major cities, and not like it is for Ukrainians. So the question of what's happening and why may not be forefront of their minds, as many just go about normal life. And it is very easy for us, for humans, to turn a blind eye to something that does not directly negatively affect us. If you want to influence a population, you have to bring it home to them. Especially if you control the media, what they see, what you can protest about, things like this. So I think the actual effect is bringing it to the population, being like, look, people are fighting back from here. And I've spoken in length about if the West really want to give Ukraine more of a chance and more power on the capabilities, the restrictions need to be lifted to strike within Russia, to strike targets on the other side of the border. Not really sure why that isn't more of a question coming in. And if the fighter jets do roll in, well, they're not going to be very effective if that also restriction isn't lifted. But that's for another video. You know, and where I talk about this negative influence on population, people can turn a blind eye if it's not, affecting you. If, for example, all of us own products that are directly built by slave labour. Every time you pick up your phone, your iPhone, your Android, your whatever, you don't think of this. You don't think that, oh God, like what the hell? And for example, driving a Tesla is seen in like high regard. You're doing a good thing. Yet the lithium mining to make that, in many cases, in most cases, is absolutely the stuff of horror. But I would expect to see much more of these partisan actions coming forward, well behind the line as this war moves on. And to be honest, I'm actually surprised that we don't see more, especially in occupied areas. We did see an attack on a weapons depot in the last couple of days. We've seen a submarine commander assassinated. We've seen, of course, other people assassinated, train lines blown up, and a lot of stuff like this, really buying into that asymmetric sort of guerrilla warfare. And that is so hard and almost impossible to counter. And the reason I personally think, I don't think that Russia can actually defeat and occupy Ukraine, all of it, is in areas like, say, for example, Kyiv. There would be 3-4 million partisans forming an infinite surveillance network. How are you actually going to stop that? How are you going to police that? To me, it just doesn't make sense. So the partisans' guerrilla warfare is almost impossible to actually counter on large scale, and where you have time as your advantage and the will to go on. But this is also the reason I have doubts that Ukraine can actually liberate Crimea, as there's now a huge population have moved in since 2014, creating somewhat the same issue, although I don't believe as passionately, but it could create absolutely the same problem. And if you think that Russia won't use this to their advantage, you're absolutely incorrect. I can speak on asymmetric warfare for a long time, as I'm fairly versed in this, but the principles is basically the smaller force needing less of everything can defeat a behemoth who is so reliant on their logistics, their manpower, things like this. And this is ultimately why Russia and the West lost in Afghanistan. There's an old Afghan Taliban adage that is, you have the watches, we have the time. Now, let's have a look at the maps. Now, I will say not that much has actually changed today, so this may be quicker. So, of course, we have Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. We have Romania, Poland, Belarus, and Russia around here. Now, I just want to point out a few things just to get you a lay on the ground. So, of course, this is Turkey here, and this is the Bosphorus into the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. And, of course, we're talking about Odessa down here. This is where the attacks on the grain is happening and where the grain was hoping to come out from there, as some people may not be as versed on these maps as I am. Now, Belarus here, of course, this is where Wagner PMC has moved in, and what we'll talk about after this quickly is the Suwalki Gap, Suwalki area through here that connects Lithuania and Poland, of course, the Baltic states through here to then NATO EU through here, so it could cut off there. We're going to talk more about that and the sort of impossibility of some of this. So, on the deep state map, the only real change we have seen is up in the northeast. So we spoke that Russia had got a lot of ground up near Svatov for about a day or so. So let's go back to the 28th. To the 9th, we did see that Russia did lose some ground in and around here. Now, they still gained some ground over the past week. So let's go back to the 25th. We did see Russia have this major advance here, pushed well forward and created a lot of panic because it was like, holy shit. And then lost that sort of nub and then went back to there. So the amount of ground being taken is being sort of shifted. And we know that a front line in a lot of areas, and the map doesn't show this, is very fluid. Now, what we are going to do is talk about some things that are coming out. Now, this, of course, I'm not going to show any movement here, as it doesn't, but Staromorsky, we know, was liberated by Ukraine in the past 48 hours. But Russian pages are saying that they're closing back in on Staromorsky, and that said, I would like to see some evidence before, we actually have these claims and maybe seeing on the map, but actually asking for evidence is what makes me a propagandist for either side, depending, I guess, on the wind of the days and the claims made that aren't actually found with something. So asking for evidence sometimes is a little bit too much, apparently. So what we need to do here is we're actually going to have then a look at this area. Now, I did speak about yesterday that this area here coming up, this is a threat because, of course, it can cut off here, that it is saying Russia is still in control of some of these regions, but it is a threat. Russia too can get cut off in Rozhny or come back on Staromorsky. So, of course, this is a very difficult situation in here. But let's have a look then at the ISW map in this area, and we haven't seen any changes in this area on the last 24 hours, but where we do see a major change in around Pudotini here being cut off. So we're just going to have a couple of reference points. So we have, of course, Pudotini here, and we have this borderline here that comes then to the east and then to the south, this being that borderline here. That Ukraine has made significant gain where it was only claimed territory through here, but is claimed up through here. So they have definitely advanced in an area there and made more ground. As we do know that this area is really the front of a lot. They are pushing down hard on here, but we're unsure yet on Staromorsky. But we are going to have a look at some maps from some other sources that do show this. So we have Staromorsky yesterday from Surik Maps, who did show that Staromorsky was then liberated by Ukraine, and then the same map today does show that an amount of territory has been taken back from a large Russian push. And there are a lot of claims about Ukraine pulling out of this area, Russia pushing in, the VDV, the paratroopers, all of this. But so far, to my eye, what I've seen is sort of unfounded. But that there is this push. So this is what these two maps specifically are showing. But as I say, with every source, every map, whatever, we'll take it with a grain of salt until we start seeing some more. Now, those are the only changes we see on the deep state. So then let's go into Bakhmut and see what we're seeing as far as changes. Now, I have a Bakhmut screenshot from yesterday's chat. Now, what are we seeing? In the north, I don't believe we're seeing any changes, nor in the centre of Bakhmut. But where we do see, and where a lot of claims are coming out of, is in Kurymivka here, what is to the south of Andrivka. We do see that Ukraine did make a gain in here. So where we do see where this yellow is here hasn't changed where the yellow is, but you can see that this spire that was heading out here has been cut off and pushed down more into Kurymivka here. So look at where the grey area is. You can just see it here. This has been somewhat cut off through there. Now, Warmapper shows very similar. So Warmapper here, this is Kurymivka here to the south of Andrivka, that they have then entered the outside regions of this area. And as we know, that Ukraine is making gains on both flanks of Bakhmut from there, and things are moving slowly, but we expect to see that, and we don't really know. No one knows. If anyone tells you this is how this is going to end, no one really knows yet. But that will conclude our mapping today. Some days are exciting. I don't want to use the word exciting, but we see a lot of map movements, and other days we won't see any. And as I say, things will move slow, things will move far, things may go fast all at once and then slow down for a long time. Things like this can take a long time, months, weeks, even years. What you guys can think about, I guess, is who has the advantage in time. And I do think that there is a timeline on this war, and I believe the timeline is more so the election next year, depending how that runs, the campaign runs. No one wants to run into election with a war going and a lot of money going out. Now, of course, we can explain all of that, but for the election campaign, people may not want to do that. I think that a lot of the American admin would want that done by then. At the end of the day, America supply a great deal here, with Zelensky himself saying that America is absolutely vital to this. But, of course, that will then end that. Now, personally, I don't think that we've seen the last of Wagner PMC in this conflict at all. I just don't believe a mutiny from someone who has as much of a threat to power to Putin as Prigozhin would really go unanswered for. And I don't mean, a mutiny and have to move to Belarus and allowed to set up. I mean more slip and fall from a window, because, Prigozhin still has all of his company. He's still got a lot of his troops. He lives probably in luxury in Belarus. He went there on bloody private jets and still runs all the operations in Africa, as we know has been proven from there. So only this week, Prigozhin was photographed in St. Petersburg during this week's Africa-Russia summit. And he was seen shaking hands with Ambassador Freddie Mapuka. Now, this is this photograph here of Prigozhin and Freddie Mapuka here. And this, of course, is the presidential advisor to the Central African Republic, the CAR. And there are several hundred Wagner fighters in the diamond-rich Central African Republic, and they're helping the government fight rebel groups. And we know that Wagner has a huge contingent in Africa and varying influence. And, of course, a lot of concerning reports of killings and abiding military coups as well. Only last week, the UK imposed sanctions on the two heads of Wagner's operations in the Central African Republic for killing. But of course, this summit was held with Putin as well, making statements at this, so they're in the same area. Putin said at this, "We will be ready to provide Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic and Eritrea with 25 to 50,000 tonnes of free grain each in the next 3 to 4 months. This comes, of course, after Russia pulled out of the grain deal with Ukraine. Of course, those countries being allies with Russia, except then for Somalia. So what about the Suwalki gap? Well, there are a lot of rumours and concerns about this. And remember that this gap is this gap from Russia, Belarus, through to Kaliningrad here. I spoke with a friend yesterday who works in private contracting business sort of world over coffee, and we sort of landed on the same ideas and agreed Wagner would have no chance against Polish and NATO forces just due to numbers alone. But as Wagner are not a state military, it would not then enact Article 5, of course being a NATO response, and that it could be used in other capacities from Belarus. It could go maybe to Kaliningrad, could go into Kiev, we don't know. But one thing with private militaries, and we do this, if you don't think that we don't do this, you're fucking wrong, but everyone uses PMCs for a level of plausible deniability. And that is what we both believe that we would see, that we of course have seen oh my God, Wagner used in Africa, in other places around the world, and in Ukraine as well but we could see more of that in this region too. And this is similarly to the Freedom of Russian Legion. They are being used to cross into Russia rather than a state player being Ukrainian forces as sort of a way to bend the rules to your advantage. And every military everywhere does this, and it's just the way of the world. And we're going to see more and more and more of this as more state militaries become more and more sort of eyes on, watched and scrutinised of operations. But we did both agree, and he has worked in these air operations where Wagner are working heavily, that there is a lot more than meets the eye. And he did reiterate that the sheer savageness and experience in operations from some of their units and fighters should not be understated. But the Polish have raised some concern about this gap in this article from the Polish news as well, from the Polish Prime Minister. We have information that over 100 mercenaries of the Wagner group have moved towards Suwalki Pass. This is certainly a step towards a further hybrid attack on Polish territory from the Prime Minister at a conference there says this, and there were 16,000 attempts to illegally cross it by immigrants. But that said, 100 is not going to threaten that at all. Poland have an incredibly powerful military and incredibly competent soldiers. We have seen that, of course, in places like Afghanistan. The Polish are very, very good at what they do and, of course, have their heart in the game of that as well. That's why Poland has supplied so much support to Ukraine, not only militarily, but as well refugee as well, and even rumours of heading into Ukraine, although I highly doubt that that will happen due to a number of reasons. Now, this is from a general in the military as well. According to General, I'm not going to try and pronounce this, Poland has nothing to fear. He says, since we directed our forces to the border, the army, the police, the border guard, I believe that 100 Wagnerians are not a threat to us. Wagnerians, if they want to do anything, must have the consent of Putin and Lukashenko. Of course, Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. It's not like 100 Wagnerians can come and attack the isthmus of Suwalki. We must be aware of the consequences of such an attack in the context of NATO. So what would actually NATO then do? If there was to be any attack from that side, it would be against the NATO alliance. It would be an attempt to start World War III, and yet Putin is terrified at the mere thought of it because Russia would collapse, and that he recommends absolute calm and composure and not reacting. These are propaganda activities. The mere appearance of Wagnerians makes everyone hysterical. We have the definite advantage and they are terrified of us. So yes, 100 troops are not going to do anything, but I don't think we've seen the end of Wagner in this conflict yet. But legends, that's it from me. If you'd like to support me, the link's down below. Never feel obliged, but you really help me out. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great day and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.